The silence that fell over the Airline's premium economy cabin was sharper than the sterile hum of the Boeing 787's engines. In seat 14C, a woman with a platinum blonde bob and a gaze as cold as a boardroom dismissal refused to move. The man standing patiently in the aisle, whose seat she had brazenly claimed, was the object of her scorn. She saw his tailored suit, but her judgment colored it with prejudice. She saw his polite smile, but interpreted it as weakness. What she failed to see, what no one in that cabin could possibly know, was that the man she was trying to bully didn't just have a ticket for that seat. He had the paperwork for the entire plane. She was about to learn that some lines aren't just crossed, they are flown, and the man she dismissed was the one in the cockpit of the entire corporation. Her world was about to experience a turbulence she never saw coming. Julian Vance believed in understanding his business from the inside out. It was a principle instilled in him by his father, a mechanic who could diagnose an engine's problem by sound alone. It was this principle that had propelled Airlines from a daring startup with 3 leased aircraft to a global contender nipping at the heels of aviation giants. And it was this principle that found him standing in the aisle of Flight 101 from London Heathrow to JFK, holding a boarding pass for seat 14C, a premium economy seat with extra legroom. First class had been fully booked, a fact that brought a quiet smile to his face. Business was good. His urgent trip to New York to salvage a critical partnership with the Beaumont Hotel Group couldn't be delayed, so he'd taken the best available seat. Flying with his customers was a cherished ritual anyway. It was where the truth lived, in the attentiveness of the cabin crew, the quality of the coffee, the functionality of the Wi-Fi. It was his multi-billion-dollar company's most honest performance review, conducted at 35,000 feet. He approached row 14 and stopped. A woman was already settled in 14C, her designer trench coat neatly folded on the empty middle seat, her Louis Vuitton bag occupying the space where his feet should go. She had sharp, angular features, icy blue eyes, and hair so meticulously styled it looked like a helmet. She was scrolling through a tablet with aggressive stabbing motions of her index finger. Beside her in the aisle seat, 14D, sat a younger man, probably in his late 20s, looking nervous and out of his depth. He clutched a leather briefcase on his lap like a shield. "Excuse me, Julian," said his voice calm and warm. "I believe you're in my seat." The woman Caroline Finch didn't look up. She flicked her finger across the screen. "I doubt that." Julian held out his boarding pass. "It says 14C right here." Julian Vance. She finally lifted her gaze, and it was a full body scan of dismissal. Her eyes took in his dark skin, his well-tailored but not flashy Brioni suit, and landed on his polite expression. In her mind, the equation was simple. He did not belong here. This was a space for people like her, people who commanded, who decided, who cut. "There must be a mistake," she said, her tone final. The gate agent reseated me. "The system probably hasn't updated. I need this specific seat." She gestured vaguely toward the front of the cabin. "You should go check with them." Her younger associate, Mark, shifted uncomfortably. "Caroline, maybe we should just double-check." "Quiet, Mark," she snapped, not looking at him. Her focus was entirely on Julian, a predator sizing up an obstacle. Julian's smile didn't falter, but a keen observer would have seen the subtle tightening in his jaw. He had dealt with personalities like this his entire career. People who saw the world as a ladder and reflexively tried to kick down anyone they perceived as being on a lower rung. "I'm quite sure this is my assigned seat," Julian repeated patiently. "I'm happy to wait while you retrieve your things. I wouldn't want you to be rushed." This politeness seemed to infuriate her more than any argument could. It was as if his refusal to be rattled was a direct challenge to her authority. "Look," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "I have a multi-million-dollar deal waiting for me in New York. I need to prepare. This seat has the outlet configuration I require for my devices." She pointed to the power socket as if it were a rare artifact. "My time is billable in thousands per hour. I suggest you find another seat, perhaps further back. I'm sure they can accommodate you." The implication hung poisonously in the air. People like you belong further back." The other passengers in the row were starting to notice. An elderly couple across the aisle exchanged a worried glance. A student with a backpack stared openly. The quiet hum of boarding was being replaced by a focused, uncomfortable silence. Julian felt a familiar weariness wash over him. It was the exhaustion that came from having to prove time and again that he belonged in rooms he had built himself. He could have created a scene. He could have pulled out his ID, called the captain, and had her escorted off the flight. But that wasn't his style. His father had taught him another lesson. Never use a sledgehammer to crack a nut, especially when the nut is so determined to crack itself. "I understand your time is valuable," Julian said, his voice still even. "So is the on-time departure of this aircraft, which is currently being held up. Perhaps we can ask the cabin crew to help us resolve this." He turned slightly, catching the eye of a flight attendant named Amelia, who was nervously hovering nearby. She had seen the confrontation brewing and was clearly unsure how to proceed. Caroline Finch radiated an aura of intimidating, litigious power. Ma'am Amelia began approaching cautiously. "Could I please see your boarding pass?" Caroline scoffed, waving a dismissive hand. "This is ridiculous. I'm a Platinum Elite flyer. I've been reseated. This gentleman is simply confused." She looked at Julian again, a smirk playing on her lips. "Did you use an upgrade voucher? Sometimes they don't clear properly." It was another subtle dig, another attempt to frame him as someone who had lucked his way into a space she owned by right. Julian simply looked at Amelia, his expression calm but firm. "My pass is for 14C. The situation is quite straightforward." Amelia, a young professional, caught between airline policy and a passenger from hell, looked at Caroline. "Ma'am, I really do need to see your boarding pass or the new seat assignment from the gate agent." Caroline's face hardened into a mask of pure fury. "This is unacceptable! Get me your purser, now! I will not be harassed. I will be filing a formal complaint against this airline and against you personally." The threat hung in the air. For Amelia, a complaint like that could mean a mark on her record, a career setback. She paled slightly. Mark, the associate, looked like he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. He sank lower in his seat, avoiding everyone's gaze. Julian Vance stood his ground, a picture of tranquility in the eye of a storm of his own making. He knew he would get his seat. What he didn't know yet was that this petty squabble over a few square feet of cabin space was about to set in motion a chain of events that would unravel Caroline Finch's entire professional life. The karma, like the flight itself, was just beginning its ascent. The purser, a distinguished man in his 50s named David, arrived with an air of practiced calm. He had the weary but resolute expression of someone who had seen every conceivable form of human drama unfold at cruising altitude. Amelia quickly and quietly briefed him on the situation. David turned to Caroline, his smile professional but tight. "Good afternoon, ma'am. I'm David, the cabin services director. I understand there's some confusion about the seating." Caroline saw him as an instrument to get her way, not as a person to be reasoned with. "There's no confusion," she declared, her voice loud enough for the surrounding rows to hear clearly. "There is incompetence. I was promised this seat, and this man is refusing to accept that. I expect your staff to handle this, not to stand by while a Platinum Elite member is being badgered." David glanced at Julian's boarding pass, and then back to Caroline. "Ma'am, the system shows Mr. Vance as the confirmed passenger for 14C. Do you have a new boarding pass for this seat?" I was told, verbally, at the gate. She insisted, her voice rising. "Your ground staff is a mess. It's not my fault if your systems can't keep up." She leaned in, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial, venomous whisper that was still perfectly audible. "Honestly, I don't know how he even afforded a ticket in this cabin. Are you sure his ticket is legitimate?" The accusation was vile and clear. The prejudice she had initially cloaked in condescension was now laid bare. She wasn't just questioning his seat. She was questioning his very right to be there, using his race as the unspoken evidence for her suspicion. Julian's calm exterior remained, but inside a cold anger began to solidify. This was no longer about a seat. This was about a poison that he had fought against his entire life. The assumption that his success was illegitimate, that his presence in a premium space was an anomaly, a mistake, or worse, the result of some illicit activity. David, to his credit, did not flinch. His professional mask remained firmly in place. "All our passengers are confirmed prior to boarding, ma'am. The legitimacy of Mr. Vance's ticket is not in question. However, we do have a situation where you are occupying a seat assigned to another passenger. This is an outrage," Caroline boomed, turning her performance to the wider audience. "I am being treated like a criminal. I pay hundreds of thousands of dollars a year to fly with this airline, and this is the service I get." "Do you know who I am?" It was the classic desperate gambit of the entitled. A question that assumed her identity alone was enough to bend reality to her will. Julian decided it was time to intervene. David and his crew were following protocol, but Caroline was a bulldog. She would not let go, and the entire flight was waiting. He could see the captain peeking out from the cockpit, a clear sign that the delay was becoming a serious issue. "David Julian," said, his voice cutting through Caroline's tirade with quiet authority. David's head snapped toward him, surprised by the use of his first name. "The delay is my main concern now. It's not fair to the other 200 passengers. Is there any other available seat in this cabin?" Caroline smirked victoriously. She saw this as a sign of surrender. He was finally backing down. David checked his tablet. "I'm afraid not, sir. We are completely full in premium and in first class." "Then the solution is simple," Caroline said smugly. "As I said before, he can go find a seat in the back." Mark, her associate, finally seemed to find a sliver of his conscience. He muttered almost inaudibly, "Caroline, for God's sake, just move. This is insane." Her glare could have melted steel. "You will be silent, Mark, or you will be looking for a new job on Monday. Do you understand me?" He visibly shrank his face, turning a blotchy red. Julian looked at the humiliated young man, then at the furious woman in his seat, and then at the stressed cabin crew. He had wanted a quiet flight, a chance to review his notes for the Beaumont group meeting. A meeting where he was supposed to be the embodiment of the Aura Airlines brand, graceful, efficient, and customer-focused. This spectacle was the antithesis of everything he had built. He made a decision. He would end this, but he would do it on his terms. He would not reveal himself in a fit of anger. He would do it with the same cool, methodical precision he used to run his business. David Julian said again, his tone shifting subtly. It was no longer the voice of a passenger. It was the voice of a man in command. "What is Protocol 3.7b in the Aura Flight Crew Operations Manual. David blinked. His professional composure finally cracked, replaced by a look of utter confusion. I'm sorry, Sir. Flight crew memorized emergency procedures, safety protocols, service standards. But a specific numbered operational rule, nobody knew the entire manual by heart. It was a deliberately obscure question. The protocol regarding passenger disputes involving high-tier status members and confirmed seating assignments. Julian continued, his eyes locked on David's. The one revised in the second quarter of last year. I personally signed off on it. The pieces began to click in David's mind. The unusual question. The reference to signing off on a manual revision. The man's impossible calm. Who was this passenger? He looked again at the boarding pass. Vance Julian. And then, like a lightning strike, it hit him. He had seen the name, the face in corporate newsletters and all-hands video meetings. The man who had started the airline. The founder and CEO. Mr. Vance. David's posture changed instantly. The professional deference became genuine, bordering on awestruck shock. His back straightened. His eyes widened. Mr. Vance, he stammered, his voice barely a whisper. My apologies, sir. I didn't recognize you. Carolyn Finch watched the exchange with a frown. What was this nonsense about protocols? She had expected the purser to remove the problem, not engage in a trivia contest with him. What is going on? She demanded. Who is Mr. Vance? Julian ignored her. His focus was on David, and through him the rest of the crew who were now staring wide-eyed. It's quite all right, David. You and your team have handled this with professionalism, but now it's time to resolve it. He turned his head slowly, and finally looked directly at Caroline Finch. The polite smile was gone, replaced by an expression of profound, unadorned authority. It was the face he wore in the boardroom when a multi-billion-dollar deal was on the line. It was a face that did not ask, but stated. A face that did not negotiate, but decided. The next words he spoke were quiet, devoid of anger or triumph. They were simply a statement of fact delivered with the weight of a 1,000-ton aircraft, and they would echo in Carolyn Finch's mind for the rest of her life. Ma'am Julian began his voice a low, resonant hum that seemed to absorb all the other noise in the cabin. You asked the purser if he knew who you are. A fair question, I suppose, in your line of work, but you never stopped to ask the more important question. He paused, letting the silence stretch. Every eye in the vicinity was locked on him. Carolyn Finch stared back, her smugness beginning to curdle into confusion and a dawning sense of dread. The power dynamic had shifted so suddenly and completely, it was like the cabin had depressurized. You never asked who I am, Julian said. He let the statement hang in the air for a beat. He didn't need to raise his voice. The quiet authority he possessed was more powerful than any shout. You see, he continued, looking from her to the purser and back again, you are concerned with your status as a platinum elite flyer, and I appreciate your loyalty. It's customers like you who are the bedrock of our business, but there are levels of involvement in a company. He took a small step closer into her personal space, forcing her to crane her neck to look up at him. My name is Julian Vance, and I don't just fly on this airline. Caroline's face was a canvas of conflicting emotions. Annoyance was warring with a growing, terrifying suspicion. Her mind, trained to recognize patterns and hierarchies, was struggling to process what was happening. This man didn't fit into any of her carefully constructed boxes. Julian looked past her for a moment to Captain Evans, who was still observing from the cockpit door. Richard, he said, his voice carrying easily to the front. Good to see you. Looks like we'll have a smooth ride once we're in the air. The captain, a man with silver hair and decades of experience, simply nodded, a look of profound respect on his face. Anything you need, Julian. Just say the word." The use of his first name, the casual peer-to-peer exchange with the flight's ultimate authority, was the final piece of the puzzle. Caroline's icy blue eyes widened. A small, involuntary gasp escaped her lips. The blood drained from her face, leaving her with a sickly, pale complexion that clashed with her expensive makeup. Her perfectly manicured hand, which had been resting on her tablet, began to tremble. Julian turned his gaze back to her. It was time to land the final blow. Not with malice, but with clarity. "You demanded to know who I am," he said, his voice level and devastatingly calm. "I am the man who signed the purchase order for this Boeing 787. I'm the man whose team designed the seats you're sitting in. I am the man who signs David's paycheck and Captain Evans' paycheck and the paychecks of all 15,000 employees of this company." He leaned in just a fraction, his voice dropping to an almost intimate whisper that was somehow more chilling than a shout. "I am the founder and CEO of Aura Airlines. I own this airline." Silence. It was absolute. The boarding chatter, the rustling of bags, the hum of the ventilation, it all vanished. The only sound was the frantic, panicked thumping of Caroline Finch's own heart in her ears. She froze. It was not a metaphorical freeze. It was a physical, neurological shutdown. Her mouth fell slightly agape, but no words came out. Her eyes, which had been so full of fire and condescension, were now vacant, glassy pools of horror. The tablet slipped from her trembling fingers and clattered onto the floor. She didn't even flinch. Mark, her associate, looked as if he had seen a ghost. His face was ashen, and he stared at Julian with a mixture of terror and awe. He slowly, deliberately began to shrink away from Caroline as if her toxicity was now radioactive. The other passengers who had been watching the drama unfold now looked on in stunned silence. The student with the backpack had his phone out, though he wasn't brave enough to hold it up openly. The elderly couple across the aisle just stared, their mouths agape. They were no longer witnessing a rude passenger. They were witnessing a public execution of ego. The purser David stood ramrod straight, his face a perfect mask of neutrality, but his eyes betrayed a hint of grim satisfaction. Amelia, the young flight attendant, looked at Julian with an expression of pure reverence. Julian held Caroline's terrified gaze for a few seconds longer. He had made his point. There was no need to gloat, no need to twist the knife. The sheer, unadulterated truth of the situation was punishment enough. He straightened up and turned to David. "Please find Mrs. Finch another seat. If there are none available in this cabin, find her the best available seat in economy, and please extend her the courtesy of a complimentary beverage for her trouble." The final sentence was a masterpiece of corporate politeness, a stiletto wrapped in velvet. It was an act of magnanimity so profound it was insulting. He was treating her not as a foe to be vanquished, but as a misbehaving customer to be managed. He was erasing her power completely. Without another word, Julian bent down, picked up her fallen tablet from the floor, and placed it on the now vacant middle seat. He then slid into 14C, his rightful seat, placing his briefcase under the seat in front of him. He stretched out his legs, the extra legroom feeling particularly satisfying, and buckled his seatbelt. As if his action had broken a spell, the world came rushing back. David leaned down to a still frozen Caroline. "Ma'am?" he said, his voice gentle but firm. "Please come with me. We need to prepare the cabin for departure." Slowly, robotically, Caroline Finch began to move. She gathered her trench coat and her purse with stiff, jerky movements. She didn't look at Julian. She couldn't. To look at him would be to acknowledge the full magnitude of her humiliation. She followed David down the aisle, her head bowed, the queen of the corporate world reduced to a shamed subordinate. The walk to her new seat in the back of the plane, past rows of staring, whispering passengers, was the longest walk of her life. Julian Vance simply opened his laptop. He had a meeting to prepare for. The flight to New York was 7 hours long. For him, it would be a productive work session. For Caroline Finch, it would be 7 hours in hell. The closing of the aircraft door was a sound of finality. For the next 7 hours, the cabin of Airline's Flight 101 would be a self-contained world, a pressurized vessel of social reckoning hurtling through the stratosphere. For Julian, the incident was already receding. He was a man who compartmentalized with ruthless efficiency. The confrontation was a problem, and it had been solved. Now his focus was on the Beaumont Group. He pulled up the financials, the partnership proposals, the market analysis. His airline was on the cusp of signing an exclusive deal that would make Aura the sole carrier for the Beaumont's elite clientele, a deal worth hundreds of millions over the next decade. The current CEO of Beaumont, Robert Chen, was a stickler for brand synergy. He believed a company's culture was its most valuable asset. The deal had hit a snag over operational details, and Julian was flying to New York to personally assure Chen that Aura's culture of service was second to none. The irony was not lost on him. The service in the premium economy cabin began. When Amelia reached his row, her demeanor was completely different. She was no longer just attentive, she was reverent. "Mr. Vance," she said, her voice hushed. "Can I get you anything before takeoff? A glass of champagne, perhaps? From the first-class selection, of course." "Amelia, thank you," he said warmly, looking up from his laptop. He made a point of using her name. "A bottle of still water would be perfect. And please treat me like any other passenger. You and your team are doing an excellent job." His kindness seemed to bolster her. "Thank you, sir. It's an honor to have you on board." This was the part he disliked about being recognized, the sudden shift in how people treated him. He preferred the anonymity, the honest, unfiltered experience. But he understood it. He had created a culture where the employees took immense pride in their company, and by extension, in him. Meanwhile, 20 rows back in seat 38B, Caroline Finch was living a nightmare. She had been placed in a middle seat, wedged between a hulking student who had immediately fallen asleep and started to lean on her, and a woman who was knitting with a furious clicking of needles. The legroom was non-existent, her knees pressed firmly against the seat in front of her. Her Louis Vuitton bag was crammed under her feet. But the physical discomfort was nothing compared to the psychological torment. Every rustle of a snack wrapper, every hushed conversation felt like it was about her. She could feel the stares of people walking down the aisle to the lavatory. Their gazes lingered on her, full of pity, amusement, or scorn. She, Caroline Finch, the corporate raider, the woman who could make a board of seasoned executives tremble, was an object of public ridicule. Her mind replayed the scene over and over. The man's calm voice, the purser's sudden deference, the captain's casual greeting, and those final world-shattering words, "I own this airline." Her entire worldview was predicated on a clear, visible hierarchy. Expensive suits, aggressive speech, and a sense of entitlement were the markers of power. Julian Vance had displayed none of her preferred signals. He had shown quiet confidence, patience, and a refusal to be provoked. It was a form of power she hadn't recognized, and her failure to do so had led to this catastrophic miscalculation. Her associate Mark was in 14D, the seat next to Julian's original seat. She could picture him up there, enjoying the extra legroom, the better meal, the attentive service. Was he talking to Vance? Was he apologizing on her behalf? Was he throwing her under the bus to save his own career? The paranoia gnawed at her. An hour into the flight, a flight attendant offered her the complimentary beverage Julian had suggested. "Ma'am, a drink for you on the house." The flight attendant's smile was professional, but Caroline could see the pity in her eyes. It was the most humiliating glass of cheap Chardonnay she had ever accepted. She drank it in 3 quick gulps, the acidic liquid doing little to calm the fire in her stomach. She needed to work. She had the Beaumont Group pitch to finalize. That deal was her ticket to a senior partnership at Sterling Price, the cutthroat consulting firm where she worked. She tried to open her laptop, but the space was too cramped. The man in the seat in front of her immediately reclined, making it impossible. Defeated, she shoved the laptop back into her bag. For the first time in her adult life, Caroline Finch was utterly powerless. Stripped of her status, her comfort, and her dignity, she was just another passenger in a middle seat, trapped in a metal tube with the man she had so grievously misjudged. And the flight was far from over. Up in 14C, Julian had finished his review. He connected to the in-flight Wi-Fi, a high-speed satellite service he had personally invested millions in developing. An idea began to form in his mind. It wasn't born of malice, but of a CEO's innate curiosity. Who was this woman? What drove her to behave with such abrasive certainty? He opened a secure chat with his sister, Eleanor Vance, the COO of Aura Airlines. "Julian, Eleanor. Are you there? I'm on AA 101. Eleanor. "Everything okay? I thought you were taking the day to prep." Julian. "Interesting flight. Do me a favor. Can you run a name for me? Caroline Finch." Eleanor. "Sure." "Any context, Julian. Just a fellow passenger. Let's call it market research." He knew Eleanor would understand the subtext. A few minutes later, the reply came, and as Julian read it, the pieces of a much larger, more intricate puzzle began to fall into place. The incident was no longer just a personal annoyance. It was about to intersect with his professional life in a way he could never have predicted. Eleanor got it. Caroline Finch, senior consultant at Sterling Price Consulting. A real shark from the looks of it. Specializes in aggressive workforce optimization. That's a polite term for corporate butchery. She's known for recommending massive layoffs to boost short-term profits. Why, Julian stared at the name of the firm. Sterling Price Consulting. A cold, hard knot formed in his stomach. Julian, Eleanor. Where is Sterling Price, pitching a deal today or tomorrow in New York? The question was a long shot, a wild hunch. But his gut, the same instinct that had guided him from a single plane to a global fleet, told him he was on to something. Eleanor's reply came back almost instantly. It was a single line of text, but it changed everything. It transformed the random unpleasantness of the flight into a moment of staggering cosmic irony. It was the setup for a karma so perfect, so precise, it could have been scripted. Eleanor, they have one major pitch on the books. A huge one. Tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. They're pitching a restructuring plan to the board of the Beaumont Hotel Group. Julian Vance leaned his head back against the seat and closed his eyes. Caroline Finch wasn't just on his flight. She was on a collision course with his entire world. And she had no idea the man she had tried to eject from his seat was the one person standing between her and the biggest deal of her career. The realization settled over Julian not with a sense of glee, but with a heavy, profound sense of fate. The universe, it seemed, had a flair for the dramatic. His urgent trip to New York was to meet with Robert Chen and save the Beaumont partnership. Carolyn Finch's trip was to meet with the very same man and propose a strategy that was likely the antithesis of everything Julian's brand stood for. Sterling Price was infamous. Julian knew their reputation well. They were corporate vultures who swept into struggling or stagnant companies promising miraculous turnarounds. Their methods were brutal. They slashed pensions, fired loyal, long-serving employees, and squeezed suppliers until they bled. They saw a company not as a collection of human beings, but as a series of assets and liabilities on a balance sheet. Their philosophy was the polar opposite of his own. Julian had built Aura Airlines on the principle that your employees are your greatest asset and your customers' loyalty is your most valuable currency. He now understood Caroline's behavior on a deeper level. It wasn't just personal prejudice. It was a worldview. In her mind, people were categorized assets to be exploited or liabilities to be cut. She had looked at him, and through the distorted lens of her own professional dogma and personal biases, had classified him as a liability, someone to be removed. He opened the chat with Eleanor again. "Julian, Eleanor, I need you to do something for me. I need you to call Robert Chen's office. Get his chief of staff if you can. Tell them I'm on my way, and that I have some critical time-sensitive insights into the Sterling Price proposal. Don't give any details. Just say it pertains to brand alignment and core values. Ask them if I might be able to join tomorrow's 9 a.m. meeting as an observer. As their potential exclusive airline partner, our brands must be in sync. Frame it as due diligence." Eleanor. Joining their pitch meeting, Julian, that's bold. Julian, trust me on this. The best way to show Robert the value of Aura's culture is to contrast it directly with the alternative. Eleanor, consider it done. I'll have confirmation before you land. Try to get some rest. Rest was the last thing on his mind. His mind was racing, connecting dots, strategizing. This was no longer about a personal slight. It was a unique, unexpected opportunity. He had to save his deal with Beaumont, and to do that he had to convince Robert Chen, a brilliant but cautious CEO, that Aura was the right choice. Chen was worried about Aura's rapid growth, concerned that the quality of service might slip. What better way to demonstrate Aura's commitment to respect and dignity than to expose the brutal, dehumanizing philosophy of a competitor? For Beaumont's trust, Caroline Finch had just unwittingly become his star witness. The rest of the flight passed in a blur of focused work. Julian meticulously crafted his talking points. He wouldn't mention the incident on the plane directly. He wouldn't need to. He would talk about culture, about the soul of a company. He would talk about the difference between a business that sees people as numbers and a business that sees them as family. As the plane began its descent into JFK, an announcement came over the intercom for all passengers to return to their seats. Julian saw Mark, the young associate, walk past him on the way back from the lavatory. Mark's eyes met Julian's for a fleeting second. In them, Julian saw a complex cocktail of fear, embarrassment, and a sliver of desperate apology. He gave the young man a slight, almost imperceptible nod. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was an acknowledgement. A recognition that Mark was a prisoner in a system created by people like Caroline. The wheels touched down on the tarmac at JFK with a gentle bump. As the plane taxied to the gate, the familiar chime rang through the cabin, signaling that it was safe to unbuckle. A collective sigh of relief went through the passengers. For Caroline Finch, sitting in 38B, the sound was a starting pistol. She had to get off this plane. She had to escape the cocoon of her own humiliation. She grabbed her bags, pushing past the knitting woman with a brusque, "Excuse me," and tried to force her way into the crowded aisle. She moved forward, a salmon swimming against the current, her face a thunderous mask. She avoided making eye contact with anyone. As she passed row 14, she kept her head down, her gaze fixed on the floor. But she could feel his presence beside her, like a heat lamp. She could feel the eyes of everyone in the premium cabin on her. Her shame was a physical weight pressing down on her shoulders. She finally burst out of the jet bridge and into the terminal, breathing the recycled airport air as if it were the fresh scent of freedom. She didn't look back. She strode purposefully toward customs, her mind already shifting gears. The flight was over. A bad dream. Now she had a job to do. She would go to her hotel, have a stiff drink, get a good night's sleep, and tomorrow she would walk into the Beaumont boardroom and be the formidable Caroline Finch once more. She would be powerful, persuasive, and ruthless. She would close this deal. What she didn't see was Julian Vance being met at the gate by an Airline's ground representative. "Welcome to New York, Mr. Vance," the representative said, taking his briefcase. "Your car is waiting downstairs. Your sister confirmed your updated schedule. You're confirmed for a 9 a.m. meeting at the Beaumont Tower." Julian smiled. "Excellent. Everything is proceeding exactly as planned." He walked calmly toward the exit, following a different path from Caroline, but heading toward the very same destination. They were two magnets set on a collision course by the invisible forces of their own actions. The boardroom at Beaumont headquarters was about to become a theater, and the final act was about to begin. The following morning, the city of New York was a symphony of purposeful energy. From her suite at the Peninsula, Caroline Finch conducted her own morning ritual, a precise sequence designed to transform her into the corporate warrior her clients paid a fortune for. A grueling workout, a scalding hot shower, and a meticulously chosen Armani power suit. She looked in the mirror. The reflection was cool, confident, and impregnable. The humiliated woman in seat 38B was gone. In her place stood Caroline Finch, senior consultant, closer of impossible deals. She met Mark in the lobby. He looked pale and hadn't slept. "Are you ready for this?" "Mark?" she asked, her voice crisp. There was no mention of the flight, no acknowledgement of the shared trauma. It was to be erased from their history. "Ready," he lied, adjusting his tie with sweaty palms. "Good," she said. "Remember, we go in hard and fast. They're bleeding market share to more boutique brands. We present our solution as the only viable path back to dominance. No sentiment, just numbers. They need to cut 20% of their staff, starting with senior management, to show they're serious. We are the architects of their survival." She spoke with the detached certainty of a surgeon discussing an amputation. For her, the thousands of lives that would be upended by her proposal were an abstraction, a necessary sacrifice for the health of the balance sheet. They arrived at the Beaumont Tower, a gleaming monument to glass and steel in Midtown Manhattan, at 8:45 a.m., a precisely calculated 15 minutes early. They announced their arrival to the receptionist on the 50th floor executive suite. Sterling Price Consulting for Mr. Chen Caroline, said, her voice echoing with self-importance in the marble lobby. The receptionist, a young woman with an unnervingly calm demeanor, smiled politely. "Of course, Mr. Chen is expecting you. Please take a seat. They're just finishing up a preliminary meeting." Caroline and Mark sat on a leather couch that probably cost more than Mark's car. The minutes ticked by. 9 Huzuru a.m. came and went, then 9:10, then 9:15. Caroline's perfectly composed facade began to crack. Being made to wait was a power play, a deliberate slight. Her jaw tightened. "This is unprofessional," she muttered to Mark. "They're trying to throw us off our game." At 9:25, the receptionist's phone buzzed. She listened for a moment, then looked up. "They're ready for you now. The main boardroom at the end of the hall." Caroline smoothed her jacket and strode down the hallway, Mark trailing in her wake like a nervous shadow. She was ready. The wait had only sharpened her resolve. She would show them what real power looked like. She pushed open the heavy oak doors to the boardroom and froze. Again. It was the same soul-stopping, blood-chilling freeze she had experienced in the aisle of Flight 101, but 100 times more intense. The boardroom was vast, with a panoramic view of Central Park. At the far end of a long mahogany table sat 3 people. In the center was a man with sharp, intelligent features and silver-streaked hair, Robert Chen, the CEO of the Beaumont Group. To his right sat a woman she didn't recognize, presumably another board member. But it was the man on Chen's left who made the world stop turning. He was wearing the same suit as the day before, but in this context, surrounded by the trappings of immense corporate power, it looked different. It looked like it belonged. He was leaning back in his chair, a cup of coffee in his hand, looking at her with an expression that was neither angry nor triumphant. It was an expression of calm, analytical observation. It was Julian Vance. Her mind short-circuited. It was impossible. A hallucination brought on by stress. What was the airline guy doing here? How could he possibly be in this room? Robert Chen stood up, his face, a mask of polite formality that did nothing to hide the coldness in his eyes. "Ms. Finch, thank you for waiting. Please come in." Caroline's feet felt like they were encased in lead. She walked toward the table, every step an agony. Mark followed his face as white as a sheet. He looked at Julian as if he were a deity about to pass judgment. "Before we begin your presentation," Chen said, his voice dangerously soft, "I'd like to introduce our special guest this morning. As you know, we are in the final stages of negotiating an exclusive partnership with a carrier to become the official airline of the Beaumont brand. That airline is Aura, and this is its founder and CEO, Julian Vance. He asked to sit in on your pitch this morning. He, like me, believes that brand alignment is paramount." Every word was a nail in the coffin of her career. Exclusive partnership. Founder and CEO. Brand alignment. The dots connected in her mind with the force of a car crash. The man she had berated, insulted, and tried to have moved to the back of the plane was a critical business partner of the company she was here to win over. She looked at Julian, her eyes pleading for some sign, some hint of what was to come. He gave her nothing. He simply took a slow sip of his coffee, his gaze unwavering. "So, Ms. Finch," Robert Chen continued gesturing to the empty chairs on the other side of the table. "Please begin. Tell us about your vision for the future of the Beaumont Group. Tell us about the values of Sterling Price. We're all very interested to hear it." Caroline opened her mouth to speak, but only a dry, croaking sound came out. Her meticulously prepared presentation, her killer instincts, her ruthless confidence, it had all evaporated. She stood in the most important meeting of her life, utterly and completely exposed, facing the man who held her entire future in the palm of his hand. And he hadn't said a single word. The silence in the boardroom was a living entity. It pulsed with unspoken accusations and dawning horror. Caroline stood frozen, her expensive leather-bound presentation folder feeling as heavy as a tombstone in her hands. Robert Chen finally broke the silence, his tone deceptively mild. "Ms. Finch, "Is there a problem?" Caroline's training kicked in, a desperate last gasp of her professional self. "No. No problem at all, Mr. Chen. I was just surprised to see Mr. Vance." "It's a pleasure." The words sounded hollow, brittle. She fumbled with her laptop, her hands shaking so badly she could barely plug in the HDMI cable. Mark, paralyzed by the turn of events, was useless. He just stared at the table, avoiding everyone's eyes. She pulled up the first slide of her presentation. The title in a bold, aggressive font read "Strategic Realignment for 21st Century Profitability." "The Beaumont Group," she began, her voice strained, "is a venerable brand. But in today's market, legacy is a liability. Our analysis shows significant redundancies across your staffing infrastructure." She was on autopilot, reciting the soulless corporate jargon that had made her career. But as she spoke, she kept glancing at Julian. He hadn't moved. He just watched her, his expression unreadable. His silence was a far more damning indictment than any angry outburst could have been. It was the silence of a judge watching a defendant hang themselves with their own testimony. She clicked to the next slide, a horrifyingly sterile chart showing proposed headcount reductions by department. By optimizing your workforce by a projected 20%, starting with a 35% reduction in long-term staff whose salary-to-productivity ratio is underperforming, we can increase shareholder value by 12% in the first fiscal year. Optimizing the workforce. Robert Chen repeated the phrase, letting it hang in the air. He looked at Julian, then back at Caroline. "That's what you call it. Tell me, Ms. Finch, what is the core value of the Beaumont brand?" The question caught her off guard. "Value. Well, luxury, exclusivity, a premium experience." "Wrong," Chen said, his voice suddenly sharp as glass. "The core value of this company is loyalty. We have concierge staff who have worked in our hotels for 40 years. They know our guests by name. They know their children's names. They are not underperforming assets. They are the Beaumont brand. They are the luxury experience you're talking about." He leaned forward, his eyes boring into her. "And we extend that principle of loyalty to our partners. We seek out partners who share our values. Which brings me to Mr. Vance." He gestured toward Julian. "Mr. Vance and I were discussing brand alignment this morning. He told me a story. A hypothetical story, of course, about a flight. He spoke about a corporate culture where every employee from the gate agent to the CEO is trained to treat every single person with dignity and respect, regardless of who they are. A culture where status is earned through character, not just a platinum card." Julian finally spoke, his voice calm and measured. "Our brand, Robert, is built on a simple idea that how you do anything is how you do everything. If a company's leadership treats strangers on a plane with contempt, how do you think they advise their clients to treat their long-term employees? If their first instinct is to dehumanize and dismiss, do you really think their strategic realignment will have any soul, any humanity?" He wasn't looking at Chen. He was looking directly at Caroline. The culture at Sterling Price. Julian continued, is infamous. It's a culture of contempt. Contempt for workers, for loyalty, for anything that can't be quantified on a spreadsheet. And that contempt, I've discovered, starts at the top and trickles all the way down. It manifests in boardrooms, and it manifests in the aisle of an airplane. It was done. The connection was made. The hypothetical story was now chillingly real. Carolyn felt the floor drop out from beneath her. The last vestiges of her composure crumbled. Robert Chen stood up, a look of finality on his face. "Ms. Finch, I believe we have heard enough. Your firm's proposal is the antithesis of everything the Beaumont Group stands for. Your personal conduct, which Mr. Vance was kind enough not to detail, but which I can now vividly imagine, has shown me all I need to know about the character of Sterling Price. We will not be moving forward with your services. This meeting is over." The words hit her like a physical blow. The biggest deal of her career gone. The senior partnership vanished. But the hard karma had not yet finished its descent. As Caroline stood there speechless and shaking Mark, her timid, browbeaten associate did something unexpected. He cleared his throat. "Mr. Chen, Mr. Vance," he said, his voice trembling but clear. "I want to apologize, for my firm, and for my own silence. What you are saying about the culture, it's true. It's a toxic environment built on bullying and a complete lack of empathy. I was complicit in it yesterday, and I'm ashamed." He looked at Caroline no longer with fear, but with a newfound defiance. "I can no longer work for a person or a company that operates this way. Please accept my resignation." He turned and walked out of the boardroom without a second glance. Carolyn Finch was left standing alone, a solitary, shipwrecked figure in a sea of her own making. Robert Chen looked at her one last time, his expression a mixture of pity and disgust. "The receptionist will validate your parking. Goodbye, Ms. Finch." With that, he and Julian turned their backs on her, resuming their conversation as if she had already vanished. They began discussing the final details of the Aura Beaumont partnership, a deal now stronger than ever forged on the shared values that Caroline had so spectacularly failed to comprehend. She stumbled out of the boardroom, deaf to the world, the echoes of her own downfall ringing in her ears. She had snatched a man's seat believing she was superior. In the end, he hadn't just reclaimed his seat. He had, with quiet, devastating precision, taken her power, her deal, her career, and her future. She had flown to New York to gut a company only to have her own professional life expertly filleted, leaving nothing but the bone. The fallout was swift and brutal. Sterling Price fired her within hours of Robert Chen's call to their managing partner. The story of her disastrous pitch, coupled with whispers of a public incident on an Aura Airlines flight, made her toxic in the consulting world. No rival firm would touch her. Her reputation, once her most prized asset, was now an irreparable liability. She had built her career on ruthlessly assessing the value of others and had just been appraised as worthless. That was the hardest karma of all. In the end, the story of Caroline Finch and Julian Vance isn't just about a dispute over an airline seat. It's a powerful real-life reminder that character is the one thing you can't buy, and respect is the one currency that never loses its value. Julian Vance didn't need to shout or pull rank to prove his point. His power was in his principles, and his victory was in his refusal to stoop to her level. Caroline's world crumbled, not because she picked a fight with a CEO, but because she revealed a character fundamentally at odds with the decency and respect that truly successful people and successful brands are built on. Her hard karma wasn't just losing a job, it was being forced to confront the bankruptcy of her own soul. This story serves as a testament to the fact that no matter how high you climb, you should never look down on people. Because you never ever know who you're talking to, and the person you dismiss today might just own the ground you're standing on tomorrow. What did you think of this incredible story of karma and justice? Let us know in the comments below. And if you believe that character and respect are the true measures of power, please hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and make sure you subscribe to the channel for more unforgettable real-life stories. Thank you for listening.